The atomic bomb was set off in 1945. It was the beginning of a new era, a modern era where the United States was a superpower and where weapons of mass destruction decided how powerful a country really was. And though the real start of the nuclear age began when the bomb was tested in the Trinity site in New Mexico, humans had been building research that was crucial to the Manhattan Project for thousands of years. The philosophers of ancient Greece had theorized about the existence of an atom, a basic building block of the universe, a block that could not get any smaller. Then came Rutherford and Bohr and a lot of other scientists in the 19th and early 20th century that said that the atom could, in fact, be split. And once it did, it would release a massive amount of energy in the process. This was a rather common idea in the scientific community before World War II, but it was still science fiction until one summer day in 1939 when Albert Einstein was contacted by three Hungarian physicists named Leo Szilard, Eugene Wigner, and Edward Teller. These men told Einstein that they were informed by Jewish immigrants from Germany about the Nazi nuclear program. When Einstein heard this, he was immediately concerned, and after realizing this fact, the four scientists drafted a letter to the president.
Some recent work by Fermi and Szilard, which has been communicated to me by manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new important source of energy in the immediate future. Extremely powerful bombs of a new type might thus be constructed. A single bomb of this type carried by boat and exploded in a port might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory.
The letter was a wake-up call of sorts. Franklin was warned that the Germans were also seeking this technology. Nuclear fission was not only achievable, it posed a very real threat to the United States and its allies. In his reply letter to Einstein, President Roosevelt wrote,
I found this data of such import that I have convened a board consisting of the Bureau of Standards and chosen representative of the Navy and Army to thoroughly investigate the possibilities of your suggestion regarding the element of uranium.
In 1939, President Franklin Roosevelt appointed a three-person advisory committee on uranium, with Dr. Lyman Briggs at the head. At the first committee meeting, Briggs invited three Hungarian scientists to come along, Leo Szilard, Eugene Wigner, and Edward Teller. However, following the first flurry of activity, the project soon slowed to a crawl without government funding. It wasn't until England started work on the atom bomb that America got serious. Two scientists, Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peierls, convinced British policymakers of the possibilities of the atomic bomb. They got to work, investigating answers to their questions regarding nuclear fission and writing it in a paper titled the Maud Report. Frisch sent the report off to Briggs, but nothing was done until Roosevelt received the report in 1941 when it was discovered in Briggs' file cabinet.
To fuel the excitement generated by the Maud Report, Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese on Sunday, December 7, 1941. While the U.S. government had already decided to pursue an atomic bomb research program, the entry into the war made it that much more urgent. In 1942, administrators consolidated research going on in many places into one single project, the Chicago Metallurgical Laboratory. Early research on nuclear fission was continued, and construction of the first sustained nuclear chain reaction began in November. Chicago part1 was a forerunner to the Manhattan Project. The researchers at the Met Lab were among the first to create nuclear fission, and their research was critical to the work of Oppenheimer and his staff later on during the Manhattan Project. It wasn't until the success of the pile that research on the nuclear bomb turned into the development of the nuclear bomb. After the work in the Met Lab, the Manhattan Engineer District was formed. The intentionally misleading name was soon shortened to the Manhattan Project. Colonel Leslie Groves, Vannevar Bush, and James Bryant Conant became key leaders in this project. Oak Ridge, Tennessee was chosen for production of uranium-235.
Extraction of U-235 out of U-238 was necessary for the project, as U-235 let off much more energy during nuclear fission. The problem with U-235 was the difficulty in producing it. By the time the atomic bomb had been developed, there was only enough U-235 for one bomb, and the Oak Ridge site had been making it for 2 years.
The Los Alamos site was chosen by Robert Oppenheimer, born and raised in New Mexico. Oppenheimer was chosen as director and had the overwhelming responsibility of ensuring that designs of the bombs would be ready by the time the Oak Ridge site had enough U-235. The scientists estimated that it would take 2 years for this to happen, so Oppenheimer's time was very short. Oppenheimer was, as Colonel Groves put it, simply genius. He had been a professor of mathematical physics and done extensive research on the bomb project. Groves not only considered him a good choice, but he considered him the only one capable of doing the job. It turned out Groves was right. According to his colleague,
his main influence came from his continuous and intense presence, which produced a sense of direct participation in all of us. It created that unique atmosphere of enthusiasm and challenge.
Throughout 1942 and 1943, Los Alamos took shape physically as labs, admin buildings, and housing were constructed. This complex became home to hundreds of scientists and their families over the next few years. The main bomb work took place in what was called the T building. As the lab took shape, Oppenheimer and his colleagues set out a list of priorities and benchmarks to complete. The main and immediate tasks were to find the best materials for a fission bomb, assemble a critical mass, and put it together into a bomb. The favored main design was the gun-type design, where a uranium or plutonium bullet was launched into a target of similar material to form a critical mass that would start the fission process. This first design, called the Thin Man, would measure about 17 feet. The design was eventually consolidated and renamed Little Boy. The other central design used plutonium as the fuel and used the implosion-type device. Proposed by Seth Nettermeyer, the new design would have a core of plutonium, a layer of uranium, and another layer of high explosives around the outside. Upon detonation, the high explosives would squeeze the uranium and plutonium into a critical mass. It looked simple, but designing and building it was much harder, and the scientists met many challenges along the way. Unlike the gun-type design, the scientists were very unsure of the plutonium implosion device. Nicknamed the Gadget, the bomb was a very complex piece of machinery that required precision down to a thousandth of an inch. The bomb was set to test on July 16, 1945.
The summer of 1945 was a critical time. The Germans had surrendered, but fighting in the Pacific was still ongoing. President Truman was at the Potsdam Conference, where Allied leaders were discussing the division of the Axis land. President Truman and the scientists at Los Alamos knew that if this bomb worked, they could use it to end the war, and they did.
The Allied nations still at war with Japan. Japanese leaders refuse to surrender to U.S. forces as they make their way towards Tokyo. Meanwhile, Allied leaders strike a deal to divide defeated Germany and bring an end to the war for good.
President Truman was at the Potsdam Conference at the time of the Trinity test. When he received word of its success, he immediately used it as a means to get his way at the conference. The U.S. leaders were planning Operation Cornet and Operation Olympic to invade the Japanese homeland. Truman knew the cost of this invasion. He knew that thousands of American lives were at stake. So when he knew that the atomic bomb was ready, he did not hesitate to use it.
On August 6, 1945, the U.S. B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, dropped the atomic bomb Little Boy on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Despite 70,000 immediate deaths, Japan still refused to surrender. So 3 days later, another U.S. B-29 bomber, Boxcar, dropped a second atomic bomb, Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki.
Fat Man was aimed at the ammunition factories in Nagasaki, the same factories where the Japanese had made the torpedoes they launched at Pearl Harbor. When detonated, the 14 pounds of plutonium in the Fat Man bomb generated winds of 624 miles per hour and 7,000 degrees of heat, killing as many as 75,000 people that day.
The U.S. planned 7 more bombings and an invasion by October of 1945, but they were not needed. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, citing his enemy's new and terrible weapon with the power to destroy human civilization.
The end of the war marked a momentous occasion for the Americans and the soldiers overseas. The campaign against the Japanese had been going on for 4 years.
Following the end of the war was a time of joyous celebrations, kisses, and a new life for the American dream.
When the first test bomb was detonated at the Trinity test site, that was the beginning of the atomic age. Since then, the world has never been the same. Following World War II, the arms race began between the Soviet Union and the United States. That changed the world. Atomic weapons were no longer a novelty. The mentality was, he who has the most bombs was thought to be winning. We tried to clean things up, but the world has never been the same.